Incredibles 2 is once again directed by Brad Bird, is a direct sequel to the Pixar classic The Incredibles, and, oh yeah, is 14 years bloody late. Thanks, Brad. If you haven't been living under a rock for the last 10 or so years, then you will know that the original Incredibles is genuinely regarded as one of the best Pixar movies ever made, but also as one of the best animated movies ever made. And it took me a while to kind of see why so many people love it, because when I first saw The Incredibles, I thought it was fine. I thought it was perfectly enjoyable, and it had good characters. But it wasn't until like the, 6th or 7th viewing that I started to get why everyone else loved it. And now, several years down the line, I love it pretty much just as much as everyone else does. Which meant when they did announce a sequel, I was really excited to see what they would do with it. I mean, yeah, it's really late, but still, I want to see where these characters are now and how they just progress the story. And I have to say, this movie was absolutely worth the wait, because I had a ton of fun with it. Now, a little bit different to usual, I'm just going to cover the negatives first, just to get them out of the way. My first major complaint is that the main villain of the movie, Screenslaver, is a little bit on the weak side. But that being said, you're instantly going to be comparing him to Syndrome from the first movie, and he was a fantastic villain, and in some sense made the movie better than it should have been. So the fact that you're instantly comparing him to a great villain in the first place is a difficult thing to do anyway. But that being said, on his own, Screenslaver works for the sake of this movie. The eventual reveal and the motivations are a little bit on the weak side, and there are a few other aspects that do feel a little bit lackluster. But that being said, he does kind of work for the sake of the movie. The other negative I have to say about this movie is the fact that the plot at times can be quite predictable. I wasn't really expecting anything mind-blowing from this movie. I mean, it's an animated film. You don't really expect a mind-blowing plot to take place in this film. But that being said, there were a couple of times where I was like, okay, that's going to happen, and then that's going to happen. One or two times it did throw me off, and I was genuinely surprised by that, which is good on Brad Bird's behalf. But there were quite a few times where I was like, yeah, that's going to happen, and then that's going to happen, which is a shame. But apart from that and a somewhat weak villain, everything else about this movie is really good. Just like the first one, what makes this movie so entertaining and engaging is the characters, specifically the main family. And if it wasn't for their likability and the way they use their powers in everyday situations, and just their general interactions altogether, I don't think this movie, or even the first movie, would be as good as they are. And I have to admit, coming out of this movie, the main thing I remember are the family interactions and the characters more than anything else. And that's pretty much what I remember most about the first movie as well. And they do a lot with this family in terms of the dynamic. For example, you have Elastigirl doing her own missions, and they are really fun to watch. But then you also have the stuff happening at home, involving Mr. Incredible trying to look after the 3 kids. And all that stuff is really good as well. And the way they balance the two is really nice to see, because no one really feels left out. But there is a good enough chunk of the movie dedicated to their chemistry and how they bounce off of one another, and you can actually feel like this is a real family, which is really nice to see. It's a good touch to see that sense from the first movie has not been lost and instead has been kind of amplified in its sequel. The characters and the voice acting pretty much go hand in hand at this point. Holly Hunter is really good as Elastigirl, and I really like what they do with her character, and she pretty much fits that role by now. Craig T. Nelson is also really good as Mr. Incredible. He's just as funny and enjoyable to watch as he was in the first film. I loved seeing Frozone come back as well, who, if you didn't know, is voiced by Samuel L. Jackson. Seeing that he's such a fan favourite character from the first movie, it's really nice to see him come back and interact with all the family members this time. You also have some newcomers as well, such as Bob Odenkirk, who you may remember as playing Saul Goodman from Breaking Bad. He plays this guy who is trying to get superheroes legalized again, because in this universe, superheroes are made illegal, same as they were in the first movie, but it plays a much more important role in this one, and I like that whole aspect of the movie. I thought it was really well handled, and like I mentioned a minute ago, it did throw me off at a few points, which I thought was a really nice thing to see. Now, I can't talk about a Pixar movie without mentioning the animation. The animation in this movie is incredible, if you pardon the pun. It's almost realistic. Like, everything from the detail to the lighting, everything looks and feels near realistic. If the characters one of caricature and cartoony design, then yeah, I would say that this was a live action movie. And that just goes to show how much Pixar have improved over the years. And I'm not just talking about like the subtle moments in the movie that are animated. I'm also talking about the action scenes, because they are, first of all, hugely improved from the first movie. They feel a lot more frenetic and energetic than the first film. But also, the animation really lends itself to this superhero, comic book style of fighting in the movie. And I've got to admit, it actually is more enjoyable and entertaining to watch than a handful of superhero movies that get released nowadays, which is quite shocking to say. But the way they use, people use their superpowers, and the way it's animated really, really is entertaining to see in this film. Also, whilst we're on the topic of superpowers, Jack by far steals the show in this movie. He's probably the best thing in the entire film, and every moment he's on screen or there's a scene dedicated to him, or specifically Mr. Incredible trying to look after him, it's hilarious. I was also really glad to hear Michael Giacchino returning to do the score for this movie, because his score for the first movie is so iconic, so memorable, and just so stylish, yet entertaining and energetic at the same time. And I'm so glad he manages to pretty much re-encapsulate what made the first movie's score so good and pretty much translate it to this one. Yeah, it does sound almost identical to the first movie, but that's kind of what you want. And unlike Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom, where certain themes in the score did feel a bit reused, that doesn't work for The Incredibles 2. Instead, what it does is it just makes you feel, it familiarises you with the universe, the setting and the style, and it immediately puts you back into the characters and the story that you loved from the first one. And the fact that this is all done just by the score alone is fantastic, and I think he does a great job with the score here, just as good as it was the first time round, and I can easily see myself listening to it quite a few times in the future. In the end, I really enjoyed The Incredibles 2. Whether it's as good as the first one is debatable, but at this moment in time, I can safely say that I did enjoy what I saw, and I'm going to give The Incredibles 2 an 8 out of 10. Yeah, there's not really much else I can say about this movie. It's really good. It's got great characters and they are very well realised. It has some really funny moments. It has some really cool moments. And yeah, I mean, what else do I have to say? So guys, that was my review of Incredibles 2. I hope you enjoyed it. If you liked the video, then give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Bye.